Good evening, everyone. Good to see you, Johnny. Good to see you, Keith. We're just getting ready here in a few moments. I'm waiting for Evelyn and for Tim to join us. And there's Tim as we speak of the devil himself. And so I'll have him on here in a second. And hey, good to see you. Man, it's been a minute, Hager. Thank you. It's good to have you with us. You've been on more recently, and I've appreciated it a lot. You know, Jeremy, you go back way, way back. You were one of our first, 20 or so giveaway winners. And it's good to see some of our longtime fans that have stuck with us, even as new ones are joining. Speaking of new ones, hey, Josh, good to see you, sir.
Hi, John.
Hey, how's it going, Tim?
Are you talking to yourself or?
No, the audience is they can hear us right now. So
Okay.
we're live with audio, but they can't see anything yet.
Gotcha.
I always kick off that pre-stream and kind of have a little talk over with the music. Evelyn's popping in now. Hey, Jay. Yeah, I know you're lurking, but good to have you. Oh, man. Yeah, that's tough. I know all about that stuff. You know, caseload for attorneys, man, that stuff goes through the roof when you have a partner that goes out. And so that's got to be a lot on you, man. I'm just glad you've joined us. And it's funny, Evelyn has put a much more user-friendly title on this. You know, I wanted to call it Death and Dismemberment. And I forgot about this. So I actually just tried to type it into my stream title. It was going to be Death, Dismemberment, and Deliverance. And Twitch would not let me do that. I can't put the word dismemberment in my title. And I'm like,
well, we had tried to do dismemberment
I know.
before. And
I remembered. I remembered when I tried to oh crud, I did this before. Which is just so ironic to me because you got video games all over Twitch that are just showing actual, literal dismemberment, but I can't put the word in a stream title.
You should have just put dismembership, and it would have been fine.
Yeah, or put an underscore in the middle. No, I don't want to. I don't want to run afoul of the Twitch authorities. I'm not going to defeat their filters. So I just I changed it to Death, Dice, and Deliverance. So that's a little more palatable.
Robert is saying the volume seems a little low for him, and fairly agrees.
Hang
For
on.
me?
For John, I think.
Hang on.
In mine, you're very loud.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything looks good. Hang on here. So let me turn this. Actually, you know what? That does look a bit low. Let me see what's going on with my XR18 mixer. Tim, thanks for joining us tonight.
Okay, so low audio from chat.
Okay, hang on here. Bum, bum, bum. I mean, I can yell. I can do that all night. Project. All right, so this PC to mixer, continue. All my level settings look right. Wow. No, that looks good. Hang on here. So let's see. Nothing's.
Texted in there. Was the text loud?
All right, let me turn the maybe it's my music to.
You sound louder to me now and there, John. That's great.
Well, I didn't change anything.
You turned something.
I didn't.
You're definitely louder now than you were just a moment ago.
Well, I did not change a thing, so there must have been some funky thing going on with the wireless mic.
Everyone's saying that's better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd like to claim credit for it, but I really have no idea what just happened.
You know what? It looks like your mic is just below the edge of your hoodie. Like your hoodie's overlapping it slightly.
Well, I wondered that, but I don't hear. I'll move it up. Pardon me, everybody, if you're hearing the rustling of a microphone.
Oh, I feel better too.
Oh yeah, I don't know. Something weird was happening. It might have been a.
It's the glitter. It's
yeah,
very,
it is the
very likely
glitter.
the
That's
glitter
exactly
there.
what it is, Rory.
Well, can they hear me?
Yeah, if they're hearing us, everybody can hear Tim, right? Because you're coming in through the same audio we are, Tim. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, but earlier you were sounding quieter, and Evie was sounding quite loud. I had to turn the volume down. Whoa.
Okay.
So wait, what? Yes. Okay.
All right. Yeah, everybody says we sound good. All right. Well,
okay.
we're about to kick off here momentarily, and as mentioned, This is kind of part 2 of last week's session, but we're also going to be diving into a little bit more of some of the mechanics involved with it, and it should be a lot of fun. Let me check our views here on video, make sure everybody looks nice. And one more.
Sorry, there's so much you can do with this.
All right. No, you look great, Tim. For 87, man, no one would know.
Yeah, for 87 years old, I am quite spry.
Okay, and all right, we're going to kick off live video. I might have to do a little more tweaking with that. Nope, that looks great.
Yay!
All right, and so welcome everyone to Blue Box Loremasters Arcanum, episode 30, unofficially titled Death, Dismemberment, and Deliverance, officially titled Death, Dice, and Deliverance, because you can't have that on your Twitch filters, but we're not talking about anything bad here tonight, just good old-fashioned D&D mayhem. So it's going to be a fun night. We're going to take what we did last week, and thank you again so much to Evelyn, who did a great job leading most of the discussion last week, and we're going to talk about character death, but we're going to also get into mechanics and game balance. We're going to talk more about resurrection options and how that plays into it, backup characters. I've got a list of questions here. And of course, we are joined tonight by none other than the ever mysterious Tim. You know him by They Call Me Tim as his handle on Discord and on Twitch. And he is, yes, the creator of the now absolutely infamous critical tables that I have. He's the first person who was able to pry from my greedy hands my Middle-earth role-playing crit tables from Iron Crown Enterprises that I have used for like 25 years now because I didn't like anything better until Tim gave me these. And these beauties, I still, by the way, I do still have my MERP crit tables in the back of this.
You gotta keep it.
So we're glad to have you tonight, and who better to talk about how to best kill PCs than the ever mysterious Tim.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will say that I think, John, you have killed more in a certain period of time than I have ever done. So, kudos to you.
Okay.
I'm given this reputation. I bear the weight of it, but I'm only an enabler. I'm not the one actually doing it.
All right, I'm not sure that's the endorsement I wanted, Tim, but I'll take it. And yeah, Johnny, I got a haircut about a week and a half ago. Hey, Mike, I did finally get I got the prints. They came on Friday of last week, and we gave away our first print of the Overgord last night. Iculus got it. No, probably not Iculus. Extort got it, and Derek was super excited. He was really wanting it, and so we're glad that he got it. And we'll be doing more of those and more partnerships with our newest sponsor, Mike Disney, in the days to come. Good to see Anna B. Meyer on with us. Thanks for joining us, Anna. And so let's just back up and let's get the kind of conversation started with the role of death in D&D. And I asked anyone if they would come on and give the counter perspective. That they either don't think death should be a likely option in D&D, or maybe they have modified, heavily modified to discourage death of PCs in their games. And it's interesting. I think that's somewhat maybe the echo chamber effect, the audience that's attracted to the style of D&D that we play. But I think also, maybe people are just reluctant to even say that, because I know people play that way sometimes. So let's just start this off, and I want the chat to be very interactive. Yeah, that's right, Johnny. You bought one what today? Good for you. Awesome. All right, so what is the role of death in D&D? Why does it exist? And let's start with you, Tim.
Well, it's a heroic game. It's the people in it are supposed to be the heroes, and so what is more, when death's on the line, things are more exciting, and usually bad guys in the heroic sense are the ones dealing out a lot of misery and death for innocent people. So it seems like it would be naturally part of it. It's warrior-esque, it's fighting, it's so I think it has to be, it's naturally part of it. I'm just going to say that.
Okay, so I get that, but let me push on that, and for either for you or for Evelyn, why does it have to be part of the tabletop game in a way that's different than, let's say, a computer role-playing game? I mean, you have death in CRPGs. You can play Skyrim or you can play Diablo, and you may die, But death in those games is not the same in the style of death. I don't know if we would be called truly permadeath, but we're sort of permadeath. Why does that feel more important in a tabletop game than in a role-playing game on the computer?
You're asking me that?
Either one of you.
I'll say it's for money. No one's going to play a game where you get killed and you have to go through the entire character generation every single time. No one's going to do it. Who's going to play that video game? Nobody is. So they got to cater to that instant gratification audience to do that.
Yeah.
And I've played video games. I would hate to have to do that too. So it's a different venue, you know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Evelyn, do you have anything you want to say on that before I comment on it?
I was just gonna say that with computer games, the stakes are different, and so of course your permanent death is not going to be something that you're going to encounter as often, but also on the same point of frame, you don't have as much control over that story in that game either, versus D&D, where you are your character and the story hasn't been written. You are writing it actively as it's happening, so you're more invested in that character versus a CRPG character who you might really enjoy their story, but you have you're just playing out what's already pre-written for you to play out.
Right, that's exactly right. And so Robert points out there are some, I think Dark Souls maybe had this, and some other games that do have a permadeath mode on them that if a player wants to choose, he can. But I think you both hit on a really important distinction, which is on CRPGs, even if they're sort of open world CRPGs, vis-a-vis Skyrim as an example, where you don't have to necessarily follow a linear plot line, they are still essentially scripted narratives, scripted, fetching, scripted things. You might take them in a different order, but if you permanently die, you're most likely relegating yourself to going through some of the same exact things that you did before. Whereas in a true tabletop game, if you die, you're not going through any of the stuff you went before. The story's moving on. There are new tales, there are new adventures, there are new stories, which, while in some ways it's more punitive to die in a tabletop game because you're maybe more connected to the character and there's more empathy for the character, but in other ways it's much less punitive because you're not having to grind through the same crap you did once before. I think that's a really interesting distinction there. So with that, let's just try to dovetail off of that point for a second. And with a CRPG, if you play, I'm sure most of us on here have played them. What do you do before you go into a tough battle?
You prepare. You make sure you have all your
save.
gear.
You save. Yeah, you're right. You do all
But
that.
some games don't have save options. Like if you talk about like World of Warcraft or something like that, you prepare all the stuff. You buy all the potions. You make sure you have the best gear. Before you go, you fight that big tough boss. You put enchantments on everything.
Yes.
You do all of that preparation stuff because you're about to take on something. Whereas in D&D, you don't know what's coming or just around the corner.
I like Dying Light. It's not it's fantasy because it's the zombie apocalypse, but you can't save anytime you feel like it. So
yeah, and
it always sets you back a little bit. It puts you back to the, So I don't really care for that, but I do like that game. So.
Yeah, no, that you're dead on, and so you buff, you precast spells, and sometimes you can know that. You might know you're heading into a big fight in D&D, and you prep and you do all of that, but many times you don't. And while there are some CRPGs, they may limit saving altogether, or like in an open world like Warcraft, it doesn't really operate that way. Or other games, they'll have more chapters. So you have save points that you can do, but once you commit to a certain course of action, you can't save right before that battle, right? So people manage it differently. But if I know I can save, or if I've just got a progress loss that goes back maybe an hour of my time or 45 minutes of my time, how does that change the dynamic that I feel of risk when I'm in combat? Evelyn?
I mean, it doesn't feel as risky. You're immediately going to be able to take it on again. And if you're not prepared enough, then you just go back and do what you need to prepare and then take it on.
And that's exactly right. And this, to me, is why death is not just part of D&D, it's a critical part of D&D. Because if you have a feeling of invulnerability as a PC, that is hurting no one but the player. The player loses the joy of fear, the joy of oh crap. And when there are no lows, the highs are not as high. The celebratory fist pumps of the critical hit and the felling of the foul beast that you hung between life and death, and not every combat can be that way, but when they're that way, you don't get that same thing when the players feel this sense of, yeah, I'm probably not going to die anyway. So I think for a whole host of reasons, and I'll show you an article here. We have time. We'll get into more a bit later. This is actually from a blog called The Angry DM, and I didn't copy it into a Word document not to show his site. I did it because I was away from my this PC when I did it, so I just copied all the content into a Word document. But The Angry GM is where this came from. I don't know what else he has on his site, so I'm not endorsing everything there. If there's something in there that's not appropriate, I'm not endorsing it. But, you know, I like even how he led this off. Evelyn, can you read that highlighted section there?
Yep, let me make my screen a little bigger, and now. Remember how I told you above in that fake session that was trying to prove a couple of points that all deaths were your fault as the GM? Yeah. How did that make you feel? Did you want to defend yourself? Did you want to say, no, actually, if the PC's decisions or the dice bring about the death, you can't really be held responsible? Did you want to point out that if you give the players every chance to succeed and they fail anyway, that's their fault, not yours? Or did you just start to feel bad about the last PC that died that you now realize you murdered? Well, that's because most GMs feel bad about killing PCs. It's true. I mean, I don't. But many GMs realize that death sucks and players feel bad about death. And they feel guilty when a PC dies because they realize it really is true. At the end of the day, the death was their fault if, for no other reason, then they could have prevented it. But also because they created the game that made it happen. And if the game kills a PC, some GMs wonder if they didn't F up.
So, in the unhighlighted part, he says, PC death absolutely sucks. It's a disaster. It disrupts the entire game. It's emotional. It creates a whole bunch of work for everyone involved, which is exactly how it should be, right? Because we're not, you know, that is what brings the consequence. And as Fraley said a moment ago, it creates a whole different dynamic in the game. So I think we've, you know, if anybody wants to argue this point in the chat, I'd love to hear a counter perspective, but I don't think there's any solid argument for death not being a strong reality that can happen inside of a D&D campaign. Now, the more cautious the players are, the better balanced the party, the more thoughtful they are, that should lower the risk of death. And I've always said in most of my games, death of a PC is rarely just the dice, very rarely. It's normally bad decision somewhere plus dice. You know, so there's normally a way that things could have been turned more in favor. I always use the example in one of my Rune Lord sessions where I had a level 1 PC, and the player knew there was a mother bear, a grizzly, inside the cave. Tried to sneak in there anyway. Which I give an ample warning that was not a good idea. When he woke the bear, he tried to run out. There were roots tangled. I had him make a very, very simple movement check. He rolled a nat 1, and he failed on his confirmation. So it was bad decision plus dice that resulted in death. Tim?
I forget where we were talking. I was talking to somebody, and they told me that bears actually, their olfactory senses are as good as a dog's. So there's no sneaking in on a bear. There's no sneaking up on a bear.
Exactly.
And then if it's a mama bear with cubs, every hunter, anybody who knows a little bit about hunting knows that's the most dangerous thing out there practically, because that instinct to protect is vicious.
Yeah, exactly right. Evelyn?
First level going in there, they deserve to die.
Yeah,
you should kill them automatically.
You got 5 hit points and you walk in there. I'm like, you know, I'm not necessarily going to kill them automatically, but they're going to be exposed very much to the folly of their choice. And if their dice rolls are great and they make good, they're fine. But if not, I'm not feeling like I'm responsible for that as a DM. So yeah, the chat is agreeing, and yet Johnny, 1 and 2 must not meet often. Fraley, Patrick said, if a campaign lasts 2 years or more, there's probably going to be at least 1 or 2 PC deaths. And I think that's the other thing to remember. When you look at something like our GHA campaign, we're on session, what are we now, 35 Evelyn?
35 was last night's session.
Yeah,
if I
so
remember
35.
correctly.
Last night was 4 hours. That was a long one. Most of them are
Yeah.
3-ish. So we've got over 115 hours of logged adventuring time. And, you know, there's usually 1 to 2 combats per session. How would you go through 35 sessions and not have a PC death or an NPC death that would happen somewhere in there? That sort of defies logic. And so I think...
It could happen.
Yeah, it could happen. It could happen.
It could happen.
Yeah, it absolutely could. Yes, I did choose 187 for the deadlier dinosaurs. That's exactly right. We're gonna talk about that in a second. All right, so I have a couple points that I want to talk about, but let me let my amazing guests, if you guys want to take this conversation in any particular direction that's meaningful to you, including past experiences, philosophies, I want to make sure you both have an opportunity to weigh in. So, Tim, let me start with you. Anything just on the subject of not only death, but game balance, other consequences besides death. We're talking about resurrection. Any of those topics you'd like to jump into?
I do want to think about it because I'm going to argue the no death game.
Good.
Tell
All
you
right.
what what's good about it. The no I won't say no death, but the very unlikely, maybe non-combatish sort of game, or maybe you're not fighting an evil villain, maybe you have a rival. It's a rival team. Maybe, you know, your party and that other rival group have the same patron who will really not like it if you kill him. So now there's all sorts of trickery and cleverness, and you know, there's tons of movies where they're not enemies, but they're trying to one up each other and win. And so, you know, that yes, it would work better, I think, in an urban environment, but there's all sorts of things you can do to, you know, make that game interesting. It'd be more of maybe a mystery, problem-solving kind of game, or you know, your guys just set themselves up where they don't get into too many fights, and that can be very interesting and exciting because it's suspenseful, and you want to win, and then you can also make it you don't get any experience points unless you guys beat the rivals.
Right.
So now you're like, so when you don't win, you didn't lose a character, but you got faced, you know, and that way you can have games and not kill people.
All right, so I love that, and the chat's freaking out. Is this Tim arguing for no death? People are looking for...
Oh, I can argue the other way.
I know, pigs fly for the sky. I think you made a great argument. To Mike Disney, I'm going to show you some quotes from Dragon 187 in just a second on this topic, Mike. If you watch any of our LMAs, I almost always have a couple of Dragon Mag issues that I pull content from because I love revisiting these old things, and I've got some things here I want to share. And yes, it has an entire article on dinosaurs. But Tim makes a great point. So there are certain kinds of games, and I'm all for this. You may have a game that's based almost totally on court intrigue and diplomacy. You know, you may have a game that's more based on trading and crafting. I think Anna said her campaign, she started at level 0, she's 6 sessions in, and they haven't even left the town yet. So by no means am I suggesting that the only way to play D&D is with a lot of combat. All I'm saying is if you have combat in your D&D, risk should be part of that combat. But I think Tim makes a great argument. Evelyn?
I don't really have anything to add to that. I mean, I talked a lot about it last week, but yeah, I mean, there should be risk involved to feel heroic.
All right, well, let's take a look at what 187 says, since some people are asking. And I'm going to scroll through here. I talk about this all the time, all the old advertisements. Go on to Anon Archive. You can download every single Dragon Mag for free. And they're just good reading. Even if you play 5e or Pathfinder or something else, you're going to find things in here that will stir your creativity, that will give you all kinds of idea. Here's the Deadlier Dinosaurs article, which I knew my chat would love, and all kinds of information on things that you were not going to see in one of my games, but they are absolutely canon. I've never denied that, and there's a great article in there. I always like pointing out the Rolemaster. These are the Iron Crown Enterprise articles. These things are cool. There's always fun artwork, but I'm going to skip down here. 2 things I wanted to show. One, it was really neat to see this. This, I believe, was I forget what year this was. It's on the front cover. I think it's 1992 or 89 or something like that this year. This Orc's Nest, I was actually here 2 years ago, and in fact, on my Blue Box Instagram, I posted a picture of myself outside the Orc's Nest. I've got some minis up here that I bought at the Orc's Nest, and it was really neat to see. They were advertising 20-something years ago in Dragon magazine right there in London. Has nothing to do with our topic tonight, but I just thought that was pretty cool.
That is cool.
Troubleshooting your game is the article we want to look at. Now, the topic here is dealing with disruptive role players, and this is a good article for any DM. It talks about dealing with problem players, how to set limits. There's a lot of just things not related to death, how to keep players happy. We've talked about this before on other LMAs, giving spotlights to certain players, making sure people have an opportunity to tell their stories. All those things are really good for DM creating a sense of fun. But they get into death here, and it says, this is page number 86, November 92. Page 86 in Dragon 187. Character death is one of the most common problems that slow down a game. In an adventure that will have a high mortality rate, each player can be requested to submit 3 characters that they would enjoy running. 2 of these characters are held in reserve to be introduced to the party should the first one meet an untimely end. This way, the death of a character does not necessarily mean the end of the player's participation in the game. Now, the drawback to this, he says, is the solution encourages carelessness because players are not penalized no matter what they or their characters do. The best way to offset this is to insist that the new character be introduced in a logical fashion, which might take a few days of game time or perhaps an hour or so of real time. The real-time delay is frustrating enough to discourage suicidal strategies and reasonable enough that players whose character has died a legitimate death should not complain. Since players should not be allowed to benefit anyway from the deaths of their characters, encourage the party to distribute the belongings of the character before the new character enters. In addition, the character's second and third characters should be less powerful and less well equipped than the original one, as further incentive to keep a player keep his starting player alive. Experience points like treasure are naturally not transferable between players. All right, so I thought this was really important because after death, which we agree if there's a campaign that has a lot of combat in it, there should be a reality of death, then how do you as a DM deal with it? So we'll talk about resurrection in a moment, but let's just assume that that's not the route that we're going here, that it is truly a dead character. What are your thoughts on this preparation of backup PCs? They recommend preparation of 2 backup PCs. Does that create a situation of carelessness? And in your games, if you introduce a new character or PC for a player, how do you handle that in terms of what are the penalties associated with death? How do you handle equipment and level? And let's go to you, Tim.
I've started campaigns with people making several characters that, because maybe you feel like, fighter or cleric, or you make a couple, but then you make one's your primary. So the other one might come in, for one adventure as they need an extra healing or a specialty cleric, or you need something like that, so they kind of have them around. They'll still trail in levels. That's a way to do it instead of just making a totally brand new one. So that works pretty well.
Yeah, no,
but I don't really kill a lot of people. I do arrange for them to die if they do certain things.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that's we're parsing words there, but I like that. Evelyn, what are your thoughts on this in terms of backup PCs, introduction of characters? They talk about delays. You've played on your own before, but you've played with me for several years now. There may be things you like about what I do. There may be things you hate about what I do, and you just haven't told me. This is your chance.
Oh, I wouldn't say I would hate anything that you do right now. Hands up, no. I have to disagree with the article about the idea that it makes players careless, as far as the idea of making backup characters would make them careless. I think that
you guys don't do that.
I think we at least with John, it doesn't make us careless necessarily, because I'm not wanting to throw away a character that I have very much enjoyed playing for 33 sessions, and wanting to make that 34 because session 0 But yeah, I definitely was not ready to stop playing that character, and but that happened, and it was a lot of factors that went into that character's death. But having the new character start off a lower level and would not have as much gold or treasure or whatever as the existing party makes a lot of sense. This character's coming in from a very different stage of their exploration and existence in the campaign. So finding the place where you fit into the existing group is a whole nother thing that I'm still learning, because when I brought Irda in, she wasn't I had a previously lost the character in an existing group. It was I came in as a brand new player onto that table, so that was a different dynamic for me, because I didn't have an established relationship as a player with the other players yet. And so coming in with players that you've been playing with, you kind of have to forget all of the previous connections that you had to these characters, because you don't know them yet.
Right.
So there's all these factors you have to consider when you're coming in as a brand new character. So I think that the way we do it works well, at least as far as I'm concerned. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said, and it's pointed out in the chat by some that this concept that this will be a style that players will have anyway. If they're a naturally careless player, if they're not invested in their character,
I have a solution.
Go ahead, Tim.
If you have people who are like careless, I'm just going to get him killed, I'll play the other guy. You don't let him die. You leave him maimed, and now the party has to carry him home for 2 more game sessions.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I love that, and I think that's the diabolical nature that has earned you your title. So there's a couple things there. So Tim just gave us a branch off. I talked about dismemberment. You've noticed, if you've watched any of the Blue Box games, that PCs, they wind up with scars, they wind up with chunks out of their body, they wind up with missing limbs, blinded eyes. Why? Well, have you ever even seen an MMA fighter or a wrestler? They're going to have cauliflower ears, they're going to have a broken nose. Hockey players many times are going to be missing teeth. These are the cumulative effects of physical interaction and confrontation.
Most fencing masters in the Renaissance, a lot of them were missing an eye.
See, that's why I have Tim on tonight. I did not know that, but that makes perfect sense. That's why we wear those masks today, right? So this is part of what's always bugged me about the style. And if you want to play this style, that's fine. I mean, I'm not criticizing anyone's style. If they want short rests and they want bounce back, and if your hit points are healed, you're fine, perfectly brand new like you were before. That's a fine way to play. But for me, in the kind of game that I like to play, I look for a relative degree of realism. I don't want hyper realism. I don't want the tail wagging the dog, destroying role play, and people are trying to, count their copper pieces, by weight, and they've got to repair their armor every time they're in a fight. But I think some level of that really enhances the sense of realism. And so if you are in a fight with orcs and then ogres and then giants and then whatever, and you took huge blows and you got knocked down and you took 30 hit points from a shot, or you got knocked unconscious, this idea that 6 months later you're pristine and you look exactly the same as you did coming in, that doesn't feel right to me either. Thoughts?
Go ahead. Were you going to say something, Eve? Oh, my father used to do that. Basically, whenever we went up a level, we had to refit. So we'd have to buy our armor, and so it was a way of kind of making a demarcation that represents activities and your stuff getting broken as you're adventuring, but it didn't get too bogged down in details. So we would have to buy our, a replacement suit of armor, or pay to get it fixed, but usually just have to buy new. It's.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at the crit tables, this was part of MERP, and it's part of your crit tables. Unlike what has been in the systems as the default, I think really from this was by 3 and maybe 3.5, you started seeing critical hits as nothing more than multipliers on damage, right? So X2 or X3 is what your crit is. So that is certainly dangerous. but it doesn't give the opportunity for those heroic one-shot kills. And it certainly doesn't give the opportunity for the maiming that can happen in a real combat. The loss of a finger, the loss of a hand, an arthritic shoulder that had a blade driven through it, or an eye, or a scar. And these are things which are on the crit tables, and then they become part of the game. And actually that really enhances the game. It makes the players feel this sense of evolution of their characters, which is not always just more power, level up, level up, level up. It's also the consequences and the wear and tear that happens, and that can be a really fun part of the role play of the game. So I really advocate, whether it's critical hit systems or other ways that you put it into your game, the options aren't just bounce back full health or die. There can be a gray area there of other types of consequences that can affect. So, for example, if I take a certain kind of hit and it's a heavy critical and I have a joint that's broken, even when that's healed, perhaps I take a permanent -1 to roll to hit with that limb. Or maybe I have a dexterity decrease from a blow that I take to the knee. So similar to the way that we might have an increase when I find that Tome of Might, maybe I have a decrease from something that happens in a critical hit. Evelyn, you've experienced some of this in our campaigns. What have you liked about that, and what, if anything, do you think has made it more challenging or you didn't like?
Well, I mean, I like the fact that there are consequences tied to the crits that aren't necessarily death as well. Like with the example of like losing limbs and things. I mean, Cade lost his arm how many times?
well, twice. But technically, the first time was legit. The second time, he did something highly ill-advised and experimental that it was never really an arm. But yes.
But I mean, it establishes. I mean, it established a new challenge that Cade's player had to work around, but B, it also establishes things that help you develop your character more in the roleplay aspects of it. If you're suddenly armless and your whole style is built around using a particular fighting style that completely changed, like your character would be feeling a little bit of a whole emotional jolt about that. Losing an eye, having things that that affect them visibly, maybe even affect the way that other people view them, and their ability to interact or be persuasive, those sorts of things. It establishes opportunities for interesting character development and in the role play, because that needs to happen, and just because you lose an ear, whatever, that doesn't cease to be a thing that has happened. So character growth, important. Stagnation, bad.
Yeah, no, right. And thank you, Statler. He said he was actually reading an article that would just happen to pop up while he was on this in Dragon Mag 23 called Damage Permanency. So I'm going to pull that up here and we'll look at that in a second. But the chat, and thank you all the chatters, great points. They've been talking about the fact that this idea of realism, it can be a slippery slope. If it gets down to tedium, if it's too much record keeping, and if you've watched any of my campaigns, I don't think it ever gets there. I avoid that stuff like the plague. Even if you look at, well, this is off topic, even if you look at things like spell casting and components, I don't make my mages find every single material component necessary for their spells. And then you're spending all this time role-playing them and shopkeeping and all. It's just or even with it, I just think that bogs the game down. Similar to constant repair of armor or constant. So there's a happy medium. So for me, I use gold cost. Every spell level has a certain cost of gold. And the assumption is that spellcaster, in the course of his travels, finds his basic components. They cost him something. It's coming out of his gold. And he only needs the specific components when they're extraordinary, like a dragon scale or a diamond or something that really would be unusual. Well, I think that same thing applies to critical hits, armor damage, and other consequences. There's a way that a DM can do it where it stays lightweight enough not to make the game a tedium, but also creates that consequential action. And I think it was Fraley that said he really likes this idea that you can have not only damage to the PC or disfigurement, but destruction of items. And I think that's a big one. You know, we saw that in the Underdark Uprising session. You know, you get dropped into a vat of acid, you get blasted with a 40-point fireball. It's unlikely that your cloak has survived that. And if you had any scrolls that were kind of tied to your waist, those are probably gone too. So there's all kinds of other ways to create consequence in combat that's lasting without actually killing a player. Great comments in the chat.
I think, John, and I think you do a good job doing of this. Is you want to feel the realism, you don't want to simulate it.
Exactly. Well, wow. Write that down. That's yeah, no, that's right. We're not playing combat simulators. That is such a good way to put it, Tim. I never thought of framing it that way. That makes perfect sense. We want to feel it. We want to have the essence of it without the minutia of an actual simulation, which is not what D&D is about. And so, yeah, your mileage may vary. DMs, if the spell doesn't, Robert said, if a spell doesn't specify the component is consumed, then it isn't. I guess that's an interesting way to do it too. I could see both. I like the cost associated with it. Spells can be quite powerful, particularly at higher levels, but that's all about your balance, and we're going to talk about balance in a second. So in this Angry GM article, he makes a case for death sucking, and it's a pretty funny read. And while all these things are terrible, he says, death ruins a PC's day. It could ruin an entire quest, and yeah, it can. You know, maybe that PC had that one piece of information or was the link to that quest, and that PC dies. You know, there were a lot of storylines that died with Millie. There were a lot of threads in that tapestry that just got burned out when she died, and that sucks for the DM too. Because I had all kinds of cool things and fun threads and stories that we were starting to pursue, and now I have to, you know, the burden of death doesn't just hit the player, it hits the DM too, depending on the style of game they play. And you know, the players have to function with limited resources now. Emotionally, they're wrecked because they had to watch someone who didn't want to die get ripped from the world. I think that's when you know you have invested players. Look at what happened with Millie. I mean, you had unscripted, unforced, literal weeping happening for other players on the stream. You know,
and I'm sure there were some chatters watching who also were.
Yeah, I think there's
sympathetic criers were there as well.
Yeah, or some said, "No, I'm just slicing onions," or you know, are we supposed to feel bad for the? Yes, you are. Absolutely, Mark. You're supposed to feel bad for the DM's loss of Millie. So a whole lot is left in the world where stories and connections want sat. It's almost like dealing with death. But see, all of those terrible things, as terrible as they are exactly what give death its impact. Yes, it sucks, it's disruptive, it's emotional, it's disastrous, it's frustrating, it's all of those things. But when those stories and connections die, that's what creates that sort of feeling of impact.
And shouldn't a hero be able to have an epic death?
Exactly. I think Shorewin was trying to script his own last night when he kept
I think I should write that down. That was good.
Yeah, that was. An epic hero should have an opportunity for epic death. You know, how to cope with death is what we're talking about now. And so, coming back to this Dragon Magazine article, you know, I think a backup character is a good idea. I don't know about 2 and 3 and 4, because to me, if you're doing that, you're probably not really getting invested in any of them. I like the idea of a single backup character, and I encourage all of my players to have one, because then they can still have a degree of investment, and they're thinking about that and imagining that character. So if character 1 dies, character 2 is not just a template that they copy and paste into, it's something that they also feel invested, which then makes the other players feel invested, makes the DM feel invested, and makes, in a Twitch scenario, makes the viewers feel invested because they like this character that's been created.
John, I know at some point I do have an argument for a pro-resurrection campaign as well. So we're going to touch that.
Yeah, we are.
I have prepared.
That is where we are going next. Absolutely, where we're going next. So let me just cover a couple other topics here on the character that comes back if it's a new character and you're not resurrected. So in my campaigns, yes, they always start at the base of the level below where the rest of the party is at. And you know, in my campaigns, because I don't do milestones and my XP is not the same for all characters, I keep notes PCs get differing levels of XP based on their combat feats and what they do, and also their role play. And so I'll send out my XP to them. That's why sometimes I'm slow with XP because I have to go back through all my notes and think about, you know, how this is being dispersed. So I'll have in a campaign, for example, there might be a 7th level and maybe 2 of them are 6th level and maybe 1 of them is 5th level. Well, I'm going to go wherever the lowest level character is. And if someone dies, they're coming in at the, so if let's say, for example, the 5th level character is the lowest, that PC that dies is going to come in at the start of 4th level. So there is I don't want to say a punitive effect, but it is a discouraging effect when you come in at that level, but it also makes sense. And what it does is they're now traveling with higher level adventure PCs, so they're probably going to get that experience quicker and get back up to that level anyway, because they're not fighting, you know, three goblins at that point, most likely. And then, go ahead.
They were kind of by themselves before, and now that's why they want to join a group.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. And then also give equipment. So for example, you may have noticed last night that Ilandra, the replacement PC for Evelyn, had a bow, and that bow displayed some minor magical qualities. So I didn't start her new PC out with, you know, 20 gold, leather, and a dirk. You know, she's got some stuff, but she doesn't have all the stuff that Millie has, and she doesn't have the level of stuff that Millie has. So I think with that new PC, bring them in a level lower. It's just my style. You do what you want, but there's my style. I bring them in a level lower and give them equipment enough that they are survivable and playable, but that there is still an impact of the fact that their PC died. Well, good. I'm glad you think that sounds reasonable, Arim. Replacement. You know, does the replacement character need to be a different class? That is a great question, and I'm going to say no. Now, it cannot be clone. You know, like people were talking about Millie's twin sister. And
she has a sister, but her sister's a cleric, so that wouldn't work out very well.
Yeah. So I you know, I've got no problem if, you know, if your cleric dies and you want to bring back a different cleric, but I'm going to encourage that there be some distinctions. You know, I've never really had to police that. I've not had a character or a player yet that wanted to create something that was a real close facsimile of their previous PC. So I would encourage there be some distinctions. I think it'll be more fun for the player anyway, but I wouldn't restrict the class specifically. I don't know, what do you guys think about that?
Well, I was gonna say, for me, I like the idea of jumping into something different. A, it helps separate the character in my head more, but B, just the idea to get the chance to try out a different class, maybe that I hadn't considered when I, you know, built the character originally, or just something that I've never played before. And this is a class I haven't touched before, or even really had considered heavily before. So I'm very much excited to play around with this new character. But yeah, I think going into a different class or whatever is definitely my personal preference to the approach after losing a character.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, Patrick, have I done reincarnation? Well, again, I've played for a long, long time, but yes, I have had. In certain situations where you had, particularly where there were generational characters and it made sense. One of the most obvious examples, this was not reincarnation of a specific PC, but in my 4th Age campaign, which is coming to a conclusion, and we got to get that finished. It's just tough getting all those people together. But one of the players started out as a ranger in the 4th Age, and didn't know it, but he was not a ranger, he's actually a fighter rather, didn't know it, but he's actually Turin Turambar reincarnated, which is consistent with Dagor Dagorath and the Tolkien lore of what happens at the end of days in the Lord of the Rings. So that would be an example of where I do have reincarnation. Have I ever had, I've had like children, so I even have a character, Aiden, who is the son of Mandaralan. Mandaralan, yes, I ganked that name from David Eddings' Polgariad. And you know, they're both paladins, and there's similarities because it's father-son. So I think things like that are okay. You can be creative, but like Retro Gamer, he said he has a player that creates the same guy over and over again. It's a rogue, and he barely changes the name. That guy would be dying every time he stepped foot on my game board.
Or better yet, just locked up in an insane asylum.
Boom! See, Tim always has something better. Exactly. The wagon comes along and picks him up off the street every time because he thinks he's somebody else. All right, so we're gonna pivot now to Resurrection. But before we do, thank you for everybody in the chat. If you're not following us, please give us a follow. We're growing. We're getting close to 1,000 followers, and man, we've had great engagement. Again, last night, solid viewership, and we're just thankful to all of our viewers. Also, join us in our Discord. Our Discord is a lot of fun. There's all kinds of role play that happens in there and commentary, and so check those things out. NN Archive, someone asked earlier where you can find all those Dragon magazines. If you just search Dragon Magazine Archive, it's going to point you to NN Archive, and they have all of them. They also have all the Dungeon magazines archived there, and it's all free. That's where I found the one that was referenced earlier, number 23. All right, so I'm going to look at that 23 article, and while I'm doing that, Tim, talk to us about Resurrection, raising of dead. So maybe I'm not, my PC has died. Maybe I'm not immediately going to my backup PC. There is an opportunity for Resurrection. Let's talk about that and give me your thoughts.
So, Resurrection is a insanely high-powered spell, high-level spell. And so access to a cleric who's willing to do it is difficult. Why would they bother? If you weren't directly working for them, why would they bother? Well, I use this resurrection and or regeneration too, like if they lose limbs. And actually, I think this actually happened to Jay's character Devilia in my campaign early on. She was using a two-handed sword and lost an arm, I think.
Oh, well, that's tough.
So they went to the bishop in the city nearby, and they've been doing some good works for him. But the solution was, sure, go to the bank next door, owned by the same temple, and they'll give you a loan so you can pay for it. And it's only 25% interest.
Yeah.
And then they now must, every bit of treasure they get funnels right on back. And don't forget the magic item choice clause that the temple has put in the contract. And don't forget, you can put in the guias. They have to submit to a guias that they must do this, or they start suffering the physical penalties of not satisfying the needs of the temple, So you can load them up, and then they're yours. They're going to do, So, you got this benefit, but now you're going to go do all these biddings for them, and you are just like real dead. You are stuck, and you have to pay it, and you have to pay it back. And so right after that, you go Monty Hall, give them all the best magic items, because the church is going to take them away. It'd be hilarious.
I love that. I love that. Mafia Tim. That's right, Moose. So I think with that, what you're touching on is you can have a lot of fun with this stuff, and you can make it part of the story in the game. So we have an analog that's not quite as devious. And by the way, I know why you have your reputation. It's not even for what you do in your games. It's for that malevolent cackling laughter you have at what you do in your games. But you have, in our Rune Lords campaign, the aforementioned Cade Cardinal lost his arm. Well, when they made it to Magnamar, which is a huge city in Galarian, the Pathfinder world that campaign is played in, and they did seek out a cleric, and you're right, it's that restoration spell, super high level, and there's a quest that they have to undertake in return for payment, and it's a very dangerous quest in payment to the temple for what was done to restore that arm. And so,
of course, it's dangerous.
Exactly. So whether it's the mafia approach and the debt, I love that, and the magic item clause, very creative, or it just gives the DM a great new tool for questing and adventure that then becomes part of the story. So there's all kinds of fun stuff that you can do. All right, so we're in this Dragon Magazine 23 that Statler pointed out. And you saw me scrolling through some of the cool artwork. Love that March 1979. That is like summer or winter of 78, fall of 78 is when I started playing. So this is right after I started playing. I couldn't afford Dragon magazines back then, and there was no archive, so I never read this, but it's super cool. And you've got areas of the body. This is very much like the crit tables that we have now. So when you have your crit, you identify what part of the body that is hit. And you could have head damage, things like hearing loss, speech impediments, charisma is, you got a nice scar, and maybe affected your comeliness. You got speed decrease, strength impairment. So this is one way to approach it. They're not necessarily, saying limbs are severed here, but there is, there is an effect that's created, and I think this could be done in conjunction with limb damage of some kind. And this goes all the way back to 1979. They were thinking about these things. So I think these kinds of articles, these kinds of crit tables are very, very fun to use, and they add a lot to the campaigns. And remember, these don't just apply to PCs. These work for monsters. These work for, the bandits that you're fighting. And while you may not love the idea that you could have an arm lopped off, it sure is fun when you do it to the other guy. So I want to talk more about resurrection with the time that we have. But before we dive deeper into that topic, I want to go into this area of balance, because that whole piece that we just talked about there, it can happen to players, but it can also happen to monsters. I think game balance is critical. And the chat was talking about this earlier, that you have the idea that you don't want all your combats to be too easy, but a DM should really never be placing an unwinnable scenario against the players unless the players should be aware that it's unwinnable, right? So if I lure you into a situation where you were just basically railroaded into it, and then I slaughter you and you had no chance, I'm a crap DM. Absolutely. Like that, I would never play for that DM. But if I'm a DM that puts, and I used this example before, Storgajol and the immature Red Dragon came upon this party around level 2 or level 3 in Greyhawk Awakening. If they would have gone toe-to-toe at that point, they would have been slaughtered in a TPK. But there were options, there were ways for them to get out of that situation. So as a DM, I don't necessarily go by CR ratings. That's a big thing that came around in 3 and 3.5, where I'm trying to perfectly balance everything. I think that's also artificial. It feels like rubber bands and racing games and stuff like that, just to pull you back. And then you never feel like you're really heroic, because every time you're doing something, everything just gets tougher and tougher and tougher. I think there can be an element of that, but there should be combats that are easy for the PCs, and there should be combats that a PC should just stay away from.
The goal of any military in an engagement is to try to render the enemy into the metaphor of the baby harp seal that you're just clubbing. You don't want a fair fight. You want to make it as beneficial to your side as possible without any sort of threat. They also are trying to do it. And so there should be chances where that can happen, where you get the upper hand, the characters arrange it and maneuver right, and they start it right, and it should be an easy fight, but it could have gone bad if they just kind of walked up to him and said, "Let's fight," and
yeah. No, that's exactly right. So it could encourage preparation, it could encourage strategy, and you're right, you're not trying to level set. I'll use a basketball analog. I don't know that he ever did this, but Kobe Bryant, when he was in high school, some people accused him of purposefully letting the other team get the score up so he could drop 35 in the fourth quarter and win the game. That is not how you want to approach combat. in any if I go back to Joe Abercrombie's books, and you take a character like Logan Nine Fingers, there is no such thing as a fair fight. You take whatever opportunity and advantage you have to end that fight as quickly as possible, because guess what? Bad things can happen. And yes, that level 2 character can put a sword in your eye, even when you're level 6. And so you don't go into a fight thinking, hey, let's make this equitable. You go into a fight to end that as quickly as possible. Now, again, if you're a paladin, you're going to adhere to certain strictures. I'm not saying that. But you're not just trying to make the fight, as easy as possible for the other guy to make it a good contest. You want quick, brutal wins.
You can fight with honor, but still fight tactically soundly, so you dominate the fight. It doesn't mean you have to be atrocious to them after they've surrendered or something, but you can definitely set it up where it's not a big threat.
Yeah.
So every time you do, you make it where you take more losses, or more likely to take more losses.
Exactly. So and you're right, Mark. It is fun, and this happened. Like these, the Greyhawk Awakening players, they fought some orcs early on around level 2, and then they came across some, I think it was about 5 or 6 sessions later or ago, and they were traveling back through the Krons, and some orcs tried to ambush them, and they were geeked up for a fight, and they mowed through those orcs in like 2 rounds, and it was just like you could all see the surprise on their face, and they're looking around like, yeah, because you have gotten more powerful, and it's not realistic that you're never going to see, you know, a weak group again, and that can be fun for the players. So that mix of, you know, combats which are, you know, good combats for the PCs and tough combats which are easy, and combats which, boy, you should probably avoid that. I think those are a healthy balance. Cade voided the warranty on his arm. That is true. Comer piled it. All right, back to Resurrection. So I think you made some great arguments, Tim, for examples where Raise Dead or Resurrection, and I think those things can be handled very differently in campaigns, can be accessed and make sense. If you do it, and I like to make it available but rare in my campaigns, because I think if it's a commonly available thing that can happen on each street corner, then we're right back to the area of death not really being death. But you can have consequences associated with it. So here's in Dragon 144. This was in the Sage Advice section, so a question from a reader. When a character is raised or resurrected and loses a point of Constitution, does he also lose the bonus hit points? So it's already implicit in this question that you're going to lose a point of Constitution. In my games, Constitution loss of 1 point is automatic. You have to make a con check not to lose 2 points of Constitution when you are raised. So there is a serious impact to coming back from the dead, you know, and it's not just you're bouncing back right as healthy and right as rain as you were previously. Now, for most characters, this is punitive, but it's not going to be the end of the world for them if they lose a point of Constitution or even 2 points of Constitution.
So, John, you're talking about Raised Dead, right?
Correct. Correct.
Right, that's like a 5th level, yeah.
Yeah, correct.
And you start out at 0. It's like basically you're alive, but you're in intensive care now.
Right, exactly. But even with Resurrection, I will use certain punitive elements. You're not, you know, going to the other side, having your heart stop beating, your brain functions cease, you know, and then you just bounce back like nothing ever happened. Even with Resurrection, that's not how it operates in my campaign. It's close to that. You know, I'm not debilitating the PC, but death must sting, and that is.
You can have role play elements of that.
Oh, exactly. Well, if you and you may not have seen this, but if you watch the only player that's been resurrected in our GHA was Gimbal, and it made sense for Gimbal because as a gnome, he was close to the gnome hold that he was raised in, right there in the Cron Hills. And there was an elder there, and they had the capacity, but that was an entire session. I don't know what GHA that was. Evelyn probably knows, but
that was
probably in the teens somewhere, I'm thinking, or you know, low teens. But that was a whole session, and it was a fantastic role play. It was one of my favorite episodes that we had, and that included a sacrifice that was made by each of the other players to aid the spirits. You know, by showing that this individual Gimbal was worthy of crossing back over from the other side, and the words spoken and the sacrifices from his compatriots in the party were part and parcel of what persuaded the powers to bring Gimbal back to this side of the material plane. I love that kind of resurrection in my games. What about in the chat? What things do you guys do? We've got a lot of DMs in the chat tonight. How do you handle resurrection and raising of dead in your campaigns? Availability, cost, frequency, and consequence. And while we're waiting, Tim?
As they're thinking of stuff to type out, what I was thinking of is if it wouldn't have worked for Gimbal because it was right by family, but if they're out and away from their home and their family, word of your death reaches home. So your stuff's been sold, your family's collected on the insurance, your wife's remarried, your kids have gone to another family, whatever it is. And then when they find out you're alive, the family has to pay back the insurance money, or I mean, it could be a whole, you know, hellacious problems of, oh, we thought you were dead and now you're alive, so now there's a big problem.
Yeah.
Make it sting.
Yeah, no, I love that, and that's part of that sort of extra level that I like that you bring to how you handle these things. This is very much Anna's style as well. I think you guys are both gifted in really kind of placing yourselves in the atypical analysis of a situation that really does make it feel real, without making it tiresome. So yeah, if word of your death is known, what does that mean to your family? What does that mean to your debts? What does that mean to your, depending on how long you're dead? That could be a big part of the game.
Like Bilbo getting home. He didn't get resurrected, but he got home after a year and a half, and they were auctioning off his stuff when
exactly.
He arrived home.
The Sackville Bagginses were going through all of his stuff, and it's like the silverware is getting pulled out, right? That's a great analog. So the Ranger asked the question. Not all deaths are by trauma. What about suffocation? Not so harsh. Would it be less severe on the raise? I think that's absolutely that. So that's my style as a DM. I may not have a table for everything. A lot of my decisions are going to be sort of my best subjective review of circumstance and situation to apply whatever modifiers that I think make sense. And I'm going to come at this in a fair-minded way. I'm not looking to punish players, but you got to remember with suffocation, you still have brain damage, right? So you have starved the brain of oxygen, and it's a more prolonged. So if you get your head chopped off or your blood just stops flowing, you're probably dying very quickly. Whereas if you're suffocated, that's probably 3 to 5 minutes of oxygen starvation. So maybe that makes an argument for, instead of a con bonus, maybe there's an intelligence penalty that occurs for that resurrection.
Suffocation is starvation of oxygen to your brain, but so is bleeding out. It's also taking oxygen away from your brain.
Right, exactly. All right, so Ranger, I think that's a great question. And then let's see what else we've got. Reincarnation is the fun one. Yeah, I've got no problem. You could do some really creative stuff with reincarnation. Statler said he married with children's take on It's a Wonderful Life. Al wanted to live because he saw how great his family was doing without him. I don't remember seeing that episode, but I can totally see that. That is very much a married with children approach. All right, anything else on the subject of resurrection from the chat? Did I miss any questions or comments there, Evelyn, that were relevant?
Not that I saw.
Okay, so I think we all agree that there is a place for it in campaigns. Let me just go to this one other piece of 144, and this is something that was talked about earlier. Tim used the phrase Monty Hall, and we all know what Monty Hall means here. It's a reference to that old game show, What's Make a Deal. The term was first coined in Dragon Magazine. I showed that in one of my previous, it may have come up on a street corner somewhere with some players, but I think it was really first socialized in Dragon Magazine. So here they said, unfortunately, fun is a relative thing. People have the ability to be amazingly short-sighted. If role-playing game lacks any possibility of character failure or death, it quickly devolves into forays through a Monty Hall gilded hole that lacks excitement. Now, again, qualifier. If you're playing a court intrigue, a political game, a crafting game, there are other styles of game where this is not true. But if you have a game that's heavy with combat, the point he's making here is what we said earlier. If a game does have the possibility of character failure or death, then sooner or later characters will fail and will die. It's no fun to have a well-beloved character die, right, Evelyn? But the tug of war is between game balance and wish fulfillment. Not everyone has the maturity and discipline to see how necessary the risk of failure is for success to have any meaning. Terry Machik, who plays Shorewin, he's a huge believer in this. He's talked to me about this before, and he really likes death as part of the narratives that occur in great stories. And it is in all the great tales and all the great odes and the great epics and the great stories. So, I think these articles and these thoughts being shared here in the chat really point to why this makes sense. And then you have your character backups, you have how you reintroduce your characters, you have the opportunity for raised dead or resurrection, depending on your style as a GM and how you want that to happen in your campaign. And I think all of that together creates sort of the mechanics for this. I want to talk just a bit more about balance, and then we're going to close with the actual moment of death and the new 5e system with death saves versus negatives and negative 10s, and how all this stuff is handled in game. What's been going on in the chat, Evelyn? I haven't looked at it for a minute.
There's just a lot of discussion back and forth about combat.
Okay.
And yeah.
And Jay said that Jim Ward was called a Monty Hall DM by Gygax, and apparently Ward still likes to claim credit for that. Yeah, and death. So you think we're not going to be talking about Millie and her death a year and a half from now in this campaign? I guarantee we are. That is indelibly imprinted on our mind. It's now part of the story of the Wayward Bolt, every bit as much as the great conquests are.
And yeah, we're going to raid Jay here in just a few minutes, but dungeon meant to kill your Monty Hall character, enter if you dare. Yes, exactly. So back to balance. With crit tables in particular, deadly crit tables in which a one-shot kill can occur. There's a couple balance things that we're doing. Tim, I'm going to let you get ready in a second. I want you to talk about this thing that you and I have discussed about level disparity. And that I think there needs to be modifiers that are applied to crit hit tables. It's possible that level 1 character could put a sword through the eye of that level 10 character, but I think it should be way less likely. That should be the cosmic event that occurs with a ridiculously unlikely series of rolls or situations. It's possible, but very unlikely, and you and I have talked about that. So before we get into that, let me talk about some of the other mechanics in the game. So when you see things like hero points or special hero points in Jay's game, when you see things like advantage in my game as it's used, yes, the DM gets advantage, but you see I don't get nearly that as much as the players get. It takes someone...
That's not balanced.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm actually getting at is my game is actually biased or balanced toward PC surviving. Right? So I have the opportunity for death, but it's not equal. The PCs, so it's not the stormtrooper syndrome in Star Wars, right? Where you're just, they always miss and you're running through and you're just mowing them down. But it's also not that the players are just as likely to die in combat as the enemies. That's not how my game is styled, because they are heroes and you do want to see them survive more often than not. So how do you do that? You do that with these other mechanisms. You do it with things like hero points. You do it with things like advantages. Or in my game, a real tipper is the fate chip. And the fate chip is something that can only be given by the DM, and it is for extraordinary moments of role play or extraordinary combat feats. You know, you double nat 20 confirm and hit a 98 on your crit and you one-shot my BBEG and it's all legit. You probably get a minor fate chip for that. I've only given one major fate chip out, and I'll get more into the difference in those in another time. But the idea is a minor fate chip is sufficient to do things like overturn a critical. Well, guess what? Monsters don't have those. NPCs don't have those. So I have certain mechanisms in my game which are, I like this sort of the Vegas analogy. I think I talked about this last week. You know, you go to Vegas, you can win, but the odds are biased toward the house. You know, the casino is going to win more often than the players. That's why they're there. So flip that script in my games. The house is the players. They're going to win more often than the monsters. They're going to have a natural sort of bias toward PC life in my game. And so as a DM, I think this is something you have to really think about how you balance. If you want horrible crits and you want permanent damage and you want deadliness, make sure that your game is balanced in a way that you're not constantly TPKing or slaughtering a player every session. That's not fun for anybody. Comments on that, either one of you?
No, I like the fate points or concept as well.
Yeah. All right. So then coming back, let's talk about the moment of death. And there's many ways of handling Terry, death to the players. Robert said, Tomb of Horrors is something he enjoyed running back in the day as a one-off, create disposable characters and have some fun. Yeah. And of course, things like one-shots are a completely different story. You know, if you TPK or you kill 3 players in a one-shot, that's par for the course.
I ran the Tomb of Horrors for my grandmother.
Wow. Okay. I bet you're the only one that can say that. Yeah. That's...
She had 2 characters: a 20th level fighter and the 17th level, Grandmaster of Flowers monk.
Okay.
Monty Hall, but it's grandma.
All right, so let me see if there's if there's anything else I want to talk on this. He gives alternatives to death here. It's a pretty good article if you want to check that out, The Angry GM. All right, the moment of death. Most commonly that I've seen throughout D&D historically is that players don't die at 0. They fall unconscious at 0. And then players die at -10. That was I don't know when that was first started. I didn't research that. I don't know if that was, kind of core AD&D. I've always played that way, so it's as long as I can remember it was that way. and then you'll have wrinkles to that. So in my games, whatever the character's base con bonus is, so if they've got what it was at first level, so if they had a 17 con plus 3 bonus, then that character could go to -13 before death. And it was only at first level, and it never grew from there. So -13 would be death for that player, whereas if a character had a 9 con -1, then they would only go to 9, hit a -9 before they died. So it sort of shows the hardiness of the PC, not just to the point of unconsciousness, but to the point of total expiration. Yeah, I think 1E was like that, and I think it's carried on through a lot of systems. Hey, Enoch, now what I also love is these unique classes that can buck that trend. I love the Unearthed Arcana Cavalier, you know, and that they stay conscious as long as they're in combat. This sort of heroism, gut, and grit to fight through where others would have fallen unconscious, but also the intrinsic danger because you don't fall down when you hit 0, you're still fighting. So you're much less likely to get hit again and actually die. That's a great mechanic in game. How have you handled sort of unconsciousness to death in your games, Tim?
I think 0 is when you fall down. We can say unconscious, but I think better is say they're in shock. So they're worthless. They can't do anything. They might actually still be aware of the fact that their death is coming soon. But that make but they just can't do anything. And the Cavalier is such a force of will because it kind of builds them up as being such a focus and a willpower that they can actually, there is a connection between willpower and surviving trauma.
Sure.
It's documented. There is a connection. So they're just focusing and not letting themselves, collapse in the shock through force of will. But they can't fight anymore after that. They're kind of incapacitated. They're just able to keep moving, so they can say medic,
Yeah,
that's really all they can do. They can't do anything else. They just don't fall down. I think that's how it's written. They just don't collapse, but they can't fight anymore.
Yeah. No, I like that. That's well said. Okay, so a couple really, really good points in chat here I want to talk about. First one to Exitech 2K2. Do NPCs hit down people? Depends. If it's a group of people fighting and one goes down, am I going to keep hitting him if somebody else is swinging a blade at me? Probably not. I'm probably moving to fight the threat that still exists. If it's a monster, does that monster consume dead creatures? Or does it not consume dead creatures? So I think whether or not you continue to suffer attacks is very much a situational thing for the DM. And of course, if you are unconscious and you suffer an attack, that to me is instant death. Right? There's no defending yourself when you're down or you're unconscious, or as Tim likes to refer to it, as you're sort of in this catatonic state, whatever it is, with somebody. Yeah.
When you go down, there are some monsters that will go after you.
That is exactly right. But I want to come back to Thomas's absolutely ill-advised and poorly constructed concept here that he put in our chat. I'm kidding. Thomas is one of my players, Heart of Adventure. But I think that's actually a good point too, Ranger. Well, yes, they could definitely do that, Armin. They may do a coup de grace, but it's going to depend on what else is going on, right? If I've got 5 PCs swinging at me, I'm probably not taking the time to coup de grace the one that's on the ground. I'm still trying to get the other ones that are coming after me. I figure I've disabled him. I don't have I got to survive this battle if I'm really smart, and if I survive the battle, I'll kill them all.
And they don't know that person's at 0. That's a mechanic.
Exactly. They see them go down. Have they checked their pulse? To make sure they're dead. So I think it really just you play it as a DM the way you think makes the most logical sense. All right. So back to I think Thomas's, and this is a good one to end with before we raid Jay. This goes to the heart of additions, and I don't want to create an addition war here because I like 5e. I think there's some cool things in it, but. He says that he doesn't like that -10 with a plus or minus con because wizards die easier compared to barbarians, even though they both reach 0 in our fight. I'm going to say I think that's exactly how that should happen. I think the wizard should succumb to death more quickly than the barbarian. The assumption is the barbarian is a hearty and hale martial warrior, accustomed to great amounts of physical damage. Whereas wizards, they tend to be more studious, and this is a stereotype, but they're more likely to be frail, lower strength, lower con. Go ahead. Go ahead, Tim.
You continue, John. I'm rude. Interrupting.
Well, I want you to say, so let me just finish this train of thought and I'll let you respond. But I think where some of this comes from is as we have evolved the game, there is, no, thank you, Thomas, I appreciate that, but I get what you're saying, but I'll tell you why I think you're feeling this way. The newer editions, and this is one of the reasons I don't play them, is there is such a focus on equanimity of classes and races that everything has to be hyper balanced because we don't want any playtesting imbalanced. And so the wizard must be absolutely as capable as the barbarian, as the this, as the that. And there's a lot of effort to that hyper balancing. That results in nerfing of spells and nerfing of classes. If you look at the older systems, there would be inequities at certain levels. So that first level barbarian is going to be they were a D12 in the old, so D12 for hit points in the old systems, and they were going to be way more hardy and way more effective at level 1, whereas that wizard was hiding behind him and hiding behind rocks. But you let them get to level 9, level 10, and that wizard now is a force to be reckoned with that can do things that that barbarian never could do, especially in the older systems. The spells were more powerful. The impacts of them were more powerful. And so you had these areas of imbalance that could occur based on class, race, and level, and they were assumed to be okay and part of the game. And frankly, I like that. I think that's like life. We don't all get dealt exactly the same hand. We don't all have exactly the same genetics. We don't always have the same exact, social economic circumstances. That's the reality of life. And I think an effort to overbalance that's what I refer to as nerfing. And I think that leads to questions like, well, man, why is it fair for my wizard to die more easily? Because frankly, when he's at level 9 in 5e, he's not really more powerful than that level 9 barbarian. But in older editions, he definitely was. All right, I'll get off my soapbox there, let you guys respond, and I'm going to read the chat.
I mean, that's why wizards are known as glass cannons, after all.
Right, okay.
Because they're, they go down easily, but they have all the power.
It's a well documented that people who are incredibly physically fit through hard training physically are far more survivable when it comes to trauma. But the other component of that is what makes them able to do all that hard training is willpower. So whatever willpower component you use in the game, and for me it's wisdom. If wisdom is high, I wouldn't mind building into the game a bonus on how far negative you can go based on your willpower, because your mindset and your force of will impacts how you succumb to trauma as well. So
I love that. I think, and that's really ultimately where I'd like to lead the conversation. Robert said, well, your mileage may vary. You DM your games the way you want to. Not everybody wants to play the same style. So my only purpose today is not to say this is right and that is wrong. I'm just giving you some things to think about as a player or as a DM as you look at your different editions and your systems and your balance and your crits. I'm also explaining why my game has evolved the way it has, the style that I like to play. But you have a world of role-playing options out there. Avail yourself of them. And I love things like, willpower is an important part of survival. And if you want to take something like wisdom, or very often charisma is actually something that is looked at as a core component of willpower in some of your statistical systems, you could use those stats as things which actually drive certain survival instincts, or I'm all for that. Do things that you don't want the tail wagging the dog. You don't want your systems to be tedious and cumbersome and everybody's got to track all this crap and it's not fun anymore. It's not a simulation. It's something you want to feel. So you figure out for your game and your system what you and your players feel, and then you go and do that likewise. That to me is what role-playing is all about. So that is a very monk mindset. All right, thank you very much, everyone, for the fun chat. Thanks for the bits. Thanks for, I think we had a follower or two. Yeah, we got some resubs. Hey, Shift 70 up. Thanks for joining us. If anybody else is following or watching and you haven't followed yet, we have one question for you on here on Blue Box. I've always wanted to hear Tim say this. What are you doing? Come come on, give us a follow. And we're going to raid our friend Jay Scott over at Lord Gazumba. And he is a great friend of ours. And don't forget, GaryCon coming up. Oh my gosh, we're just over 2 weeks from GaryCon. And Blue Box has 4 streams, count them 4. Well, actually 3 streams, plus I participate in a roundtable. It's going to be a blast at GaryCon. So make sure you're signed up. And we will see you soon. Blue Box will be back on Sunday with our Rune Lords campaign. And everybody have a great night. Thank you again, Tim. Thank you, Evelyn. Enjoyed the conversation. This was one of my this is one of my favorites. I really liked the conversation tonight, and not just because I talked a lot. All right, everybody have a great night. See you later. Bye bye.
See ya. Yeah.
All right, and the raid 4-3 raiding Lord Gasumba with 38 viewers.